You know his words will get you farther than the film will ever go. Give him a moment of your time, he'll tell you what's wrong with the show. He knows what's good, what's bad, what's really bad. His face is just a sign. Say hello to Confused Matthew.
Superman Returns, a film that is part sequel, part remake, part reboot, and all bad movie. I have never seen anything like this film. I have seen plenty of superhero film sequels that were far worse than this one with regard to the story, the characters, and the dialogue, and all of those things are certainly bad in Superman Returns. But that's not what got me this time. What got me was the fact that this film simply has an identity crisis. It just doesn't know what kind of film it wants to be at any given time. You have moments in this film that feel like it's trying to be a sequel, but then you have moments that feel like it's trying to remake the first one and start over. This gives the terribly uneven impression that Superman Returns is trying to be a sequel and a reboot at the same time, which always causes me to ask, why didn't they just do a reboot? Now, this film was in late pre-production when Batman Begins was released, so you could argue that the idea of a reboot hadn't caught on enough yet for them to try to work with that inspiration, but it doesn't matter. Even if you want to think of this as a pre-Batman Begins superhero film just based on when the screenplay was written, this movie was still just weird. Again, it's not the worst superhero sequel I've seen, but it's definitely the strangest, just in terms of how inconsistently it's put together. Half the time it's trying to be modern, and the other half it's trying to be the first movie again. But strangest of all is the fact that this film is supposed to be a sequel to the first two Superman films, but not to the last two Superman films. I mean, I understand that the last two films sucked, but this creates the most franchise confusion that has ever been made out of anything. I'm supposed to watch Supermans 1, 2, and 5 and ignore 3 and 4. Well, I mean, I'll do it, but fuck. The plot is terrible. When you actually break it down, nothing actually happens in this movie until about the last 40 minutes of the film. The characters have their own unique problems, even when they work, which we'll get to as we go along, but this film's biggest problem is that it just can't decide if it's trying to be classic or modern, sequel or remake. It's the most inconsistently made supposed sequel that I have ever seen. We're way past the point of just talking about the plot here. The very conception of this film was god-awful. We start off with a scene explaining how Lex Luthor comes back to power by bilking an old woman out of her estate. With that job done, he leaves to hatch his evil scheme, and then we cut to Kent Farm. Superman crash lands back on Earth after we don't know how long yet, and tries to settle back into his own life. And here is the first truly weird part of the film. As he stands there thinking about his life, we get flashbacks from when he was a boy. Now, haven't I seen this before in another movie somewhere? Oh yeah, it was the first movie. This doesn't even feel like part of a new Superman film. It feels like a remake. We've seen this before already, so if you're assuming that this is a sequel, then why are you even showing this to us again? We don't learn anything from Superman's childhood that we didn't already know. If you felt like you actually needed to introduce the character again, why didn't you just do a reboot? So back on Luthor's new super yacht, or whatever the hell this is, we find he and his goons sailing off to the Fortress of Solitude.
I just want what Prometheus wanted.
Sounds great, Lex, but you're not a god.
Gods are selfish beings who fly around in little red capes and don't share their power with mankind.
Okay, I'm confused. This is supposed to be a sequel, right? Then why is this character completely different from Gene Hackman's character in the first movie? This Lex Luthor is nothing like the original. That Luthor was a bit silly and more lighthearted. This Lex is cold and methodical. Don't get me wrong, I like this guy. Kevin Spacey actually does a very good job playing this role. It's just not the role of the first two films that Superman Returns is supposed to be a sequel to. If you were going to change the character so radically, why didn't you just do a reboot? They make it to the Fortress of Solitude, and this scene only causes more confusion for me. Admittedly, it's been a while since I've seen the old Superman films, so I don't exactly remember when Luthor had been here before, but it just raises the question of why he never came here looking for all this in the first place. I'm not even talking about during the time when Superman was gone. It's not like Superman spends all of his time in the Fortress of Solitude. He's almost never there. He could have done this at pretty much any time in the past, so why is he coming here now? Anyway, back on Kent Farm, we basically learn nothing except that Clark left for 5 years to go find Krypton. We'll get into all that bullshit later in the review, but for now, he seems a little disappointed that he didn't find it.
Clark, the universe is a big place. You don't know who's out there. And even if you are the last, you're not alone.
Even if you're the last, you're not alone? You're telling me that after everything he's seen and done in the first two films that he doesn't already know that? This just isn't adding up. They're trying to make this a sequel while at the same time starting Clark's motives and outlooks from scratch. So once again, if you're going to try to restart this character, why didn't you just do a reboot? I know you're probably sick of me saying that, but fuck! On a basic level, however, he looks and acts exactly like the character from the first two films. Both he and Christopher Reeve's character are virtually identical, right down to the way they look. But there are two problems with this. First, the only reason this actor was cast as Clark Kent/Superman is because he looks like Christopher Reeve. It would be like someone casting an Elvis impersonator to play Elvis, and that's exactly the problem. This doesn't feel like a real performance. It feels like an impersonation. Brandon Roth, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is just copying, downright imitating Christopher Reeve's performance, and as a result, it just feels like a forgery. But here's what I don't understand. In this space in the film where nothing is happening except Clark getting acquainted with characters that he's already supposed to be acquainted with, we are reintroduced to Lois Lane. And look at this. Look how ridiculous this is. They cast a woman who is at least 10 years younger than the original Lois was in Superman 2. And her character is completely different than the original Lois Lane. That Lois Lane actually had a character. This stump of wood is completely lackluster by comparison. So you've got one character who is exactly the same as the other two films, and the rest of the characters who are completely different from the characters in the other two films. What am I supposed to think about all this? Is it a sequel? Is it a remake? Is it a reboot? What's going on here? So after their stint at the Fortress of Solitude, Luthor and his gang plan on what to do with the crystals they seized, and all in the backdrop of a cheesy 80s comedy. This is a 2006 film, and this is what we get. Kooky villains in their kooky villain lair with a style of humor that's right out of the 80s. It's not a homage, it's a modern film. What the fuck are you doing? Luthor demonstrates the power of the crystals, and this causes both his stupid model and the whole city to go haywire. And at this point, Lois is on a space shuttle that is being tested, which goes haywire as well and loses control. Now, this space shuttle has nothing to do with anything. It's not part of the story, it's just a ridiculous contrivance to put Lois in danger so that Superman can save her. Well, that's exactly what he does. After a big special effects show, he rescues Lois and sets her down in a baseball stadium.
Well, I hope this experience hasn't put any of you off flying. Statistically speaking, it's still the safest way to travel.
See, that's the strategy of this whole movie right there. When in doubt, just rip off the first film. Now, believe it or not, we are 40 minutes into this movie so far, and nothing has happened. So here's what I get from Superman Returns so far. The film is a sequel, the plot is a remake, and the characters are a reboot. How on earth did this mutant of a film get made? For the next long stretch of film, nothing happens to either Clark Kent or Superman. Clark's friends all just hang out with him pretty much like he never left, and all they do is talk about how Superman is back. I'm actually not kidding about this. It's like they put Superman back into a film just to talk about how he's back. Lois in particular is a bit bitchy about the subject, and with good reason, but we'll get into that later. Now, shouldn't it occur to some of these people that, gee, Clark has been gone for exactly as long as Superman? Something seems a little coincidental about that. I mean, it's always been a little silly that they can't figure out who he is, but this is just ridiculous. It's fucking obvious. So anyway, Clark is finally introduced to Lois's kid, who I guess she had when she was 15? She tells Clark that the kid actually belongs to her new pilot boyfriend, and the issue is largely dropped until the tail end of the film. But don't worry, we'll go all into the issue with the kid in part 3. Superman later drops in on Lois and her new beau, literally looking at them through the walls and listening to their conversation. I don't understand what they're doing with the character at this point. I mean, he did a few things similar to this in the earlier films, but not when it came to someone's personal relationship. Something about him listening in on a couple's private conversation just makes him out to be a needlessly obsessed stalker. So with Lois being involved with someone else frustrating the hell out of him, he races off to take his frustrations out on the criminal element of the city. We go into somewhat of a minor montage with Superman randomly stopping crime, which once again is exactly what we saw in the first film. The problem is, that was the first film. We were seeing Superman do his thing for the first time. This is either film 3 or film 5, depending on how you want to look at it, and we don't need to watch this again. This has nothing to do with the story. The only crime he stops that has anything to do with anything in the film is when he saves the woman who turns out to be a decoy. It was really just to get him out of the way so that Lex Luthor could steal the kryptonite from a museum, which seems unnecessary. I mean, it's kryptonite. It's not like he's going to go in there even if you are robbing the place. And even if he does, you have kryptonite. So finally Superman pays a visit to Lois, and the two talk about nothing. Just nothing. He flies her up in the air and around the city, and once again, the scene isn't really that different from the first film. It's just the first movie again. We get introduced to Superman, he flies off to stop random crimes, flies off with Lois Lane. I mean, what is the point of watching this film? At this point, I mean, just go rent the good one. There's only one part of this that is any different from the first film, and that is the issue of Lois writing the article on why the world doesn't need Superman. See, Lois was mighty pissed off that Superman left them all, and here finally Superman explains why he did this in his own words.
Let's start with the big question. Where'd you go?
To Krypton?
But you told me it was destroyed ages ago.
It was. But when astronomers thought they found it, I had to see for myself.
That's why you left? To see something that astronomers could see? How on earth could astronomers think they found a planet that was blown up? This was obviously a mistake. You couldn't just wait for them to gather more information. You had to leave immediately? And the worst part of all this is that Superman didn't even tell anyone he was leaving. Why? It's not like if you tell someone the world will come to an end, you're just going to see a planet that you know is destroyed. I don't know what the writers think they're doing with this motivation, but quite frankly, it's turning Superman into a dick. Lois is right. He did leave them without so much as a word. Superman really did abandon the Earth for no good reason. And as for the world doesn't need Superman, that was the only part of this film that had any potential whatsoever, and it goes nowhere.
I read the article, Lois.
Yeah, so did a lot of people. Tomorrow night they're giving me the Pulitzer.
Why did you write it?
How could you leave us like that? I moved on. So did the rest of us. That's why I wrote it. The world doesn't need a savior.
Really? Because everyone in the baseball stadium sure seemed happy as fuck to see him, and so does everyone else he encounters. This is why I don't even understand why they even came up with the idea of Superman being gone for 5 years. It just goes nowhere. Everything is exactly the same as the way he left it. It's not like the world went to shit after he was gone. Hell, Luthor wasn't even a threat until the day he got back. If they wanted to make this a story about Superman working back into the favor of the city, they should have had the stadium full of people booing him when he rescued the plane. That actually could have been interesting. It would have thrown a reaction at him that he has never encountered before. But that just doesn't happen here. No one is rejecting Superman. No one cares that he was gone. They're all just like, okay, I guess you're back. Yay. And as for Lois, she is right to bitch about Superman's running out on them, but that's all she does in this movie. The character is completely worthless. So once again, after this useless conversation, he flies Lois around the city just like he did in the first movie. I feel like I don't even have to say anything at this point. Nothing has happened in this film so far. There's no threat, no challenge for Superman to overcome, and no story to get involved with. Superman returns just to do the same shit he did in the first one, but without the plot, story, and characters to make it, good. But okay, so here's the biggest what the fuck moment in the film for me. In tracking down a lead, I think Lois notices a yacht parked outside of a building, so in the spur of the moment, she takes her son and investigates it. What the fuck did she bring the kid for? Don't you think it's a little dangerous to be bringing your child onto a potentially dangerous boat when you don't know what's on it? Honestly, why didn't she at least take him home first? I mean, the boat was about to leave, but she didn't know that. If you don't know what's on the boat, you shouldn't risk your kid's safety, and if you do know what's on the boat, you really shouldn't risk your kid's safety. What the fuck did she bring him on the boat for? But like a dumbass, she brings her kid with her onto the boat, and oh, what do you know? The two get kidnapped by Lex Luthor. What a fucking surprise. So Lois and her kid are now trapped on Luthor's boat, and he begins to explain his evil master plan. Again, it's not all that different from his plan in the first movie where he tried to make a new country or continent or whatever, but this one is much stupider, and it doesn't make any goddamn sense. He's gonna drop one of these crystal things into the ocean, and it's gonna make a big new supposed continent that will wipe out the United States. Why? Because he wants to sell the land. That's right, he thinks there's money in land, and he wants people to pay out the nose for this. Well, he's right. There is money in land. But you know what there's more money in? Weapons. You have a continent killer. Why don't you just sell that? But no, he's going to make new land and sell it to potential buyers. But within this plan is the most obvious problem with a plan that perhaps I've ever seen. Fast forwarding the movie a bit, Luthor does eventually drop this thing into the ocean and the thing starts to spawn, but look at this thing. This is not land. This is a bunch of jagged crystals and rocks. Who the fuck is gonna buy this thing? You can't build anything on it. You can't grow anything on it. The land is worthless.
And the rest of the world will just let you keep it? They'll
What? I'll have advanced alien technology thousands of years beyond what anyone could throw at me. Bring it on!
What alien technology? I don't see any advanced alien technology here. All I see is a bunch of worthless crystals and rocks. Even for an over-the-top supervillain, this is just the most boneheaded plan I've ever seen. Luthor has nothing to gain by doing this. But here we go. The biggest, stupidest reveal of the film. Turns out that the kid Lois said was her boyfriend's is actually Superman's kid. And this was worked into the story for the worst of all reasons. See, the thing is, I'm just not a big fan of Superman. The character, I mean. The character and the story, it's all just not my thing. And I can accept that as the reason for my disinterest, regardless of how good the material might be to fans. The first two Superman films were classic films in their own right, and I completely accept that. But I have also accepted the fact that Superman just is not for me. But this Son of Superman angle does something that you should never do when working with an iconic figure in a new film. Try to reconstruct that iconic figure to please people like me. The truth of the matter is that for some reason, they thought giving Superman a kid would make him personally deeper and thus more relatable to a younger audience, or an audience that prefers a more relatable superhero. But here's the thing. While Superman may not be the most relatable hero in the bunch, he has plenty of other qualities that fans already love him for. You would think they would try to enhance those qualities rather than trying to completely reinvent him. But even beyond that, the sad truth is that this Superman has a kid angle just wasn't going to work anyway. First of all, giving Superman a kid just for the sake of giving him one isn't going to make the character any more interesting for me. You have to build a relationship between father and son, otherwise he just has the kid and who cares? Second, Superman doesn't even realize that this is his kid until the final minutes of the film, so for the majority of the time, it's not even an issue we're even thinking about. The kid doesn't even function as Superman's kid, save for a few scenes, and other than that, he has nothing to say or do. He's simply baggage. I know I'm preaching to the converted here, as I have never heard anyone argue that the kid was a good decision or that it was handled right. But yeah, one of Hollywood's biggest mistakes right there. And what makes this worse is once again the terrible casting of Lois Lane. I'm not necessarily saying that this is a bad actress, I haven't really seen her in enough to make that decision, but the problem is just her age. This woman is obviously in her very, very early 20s, so we know that she had to have had this kid when she was a minor, and if this is Superman's kid, that's just a little statutory. There's nothing about this that works. Moving on. So Lois and her son try to evade the guard by playing the piano. I'm actually not kidding about that. And while the goon is distracted, Lois faxes for help. I'm not kidding about that either. The goon finally roughs her up and the kid throws a piano at him. Now, what weirds me out about this is that we are told that the goon he threw the piano at died. They could have just said that he was hurt or knocked out or not addressed it at all, but they actually made a point of confirming that the poor kid killed someone. That's a pretty crappy way to start your life. I mean, geez, what was that about? So finally, Luthor drops his magic crystal into the water, and fundamentally, all it ends up doing is shaking up the city a little. That's really it. The United States is in potential danger from the slowest acting weapon I have ever seen. It's never said directly how long it's going to take for this thing to obliterate the United States, and that makes the climax of this film completely lackluster. We just don't know how imminent the threat is, so we really have no idea if Superman needs to act fast, or if he has more than enough time to solve the problem. But the bottom line is that at the present moment, Luthor's big continent killer didn't do anything. If it hadn't been for someone randomly dropping a cigar, I'm not kidding, if it hadn't been for someone randomly dropping a cigar, it would only have been the equivalent of one of the smallest earthquakes in human history. I'll give the movie this, though. The scene where Superman is flying around and saving everyone, that was okay. The film obviously doesn't have an interesting context to put it in, but it was relatively well done and pretty exciting. And it's at least something after nearly 2 hours of listening to everyone complain about everything. Finally, Superman flies off to one of the most boring and repetitious climaxes I've ever seen. It feels like we're watching the same climax over and over again. Think about it. Superman rescues, then he gets his ass kicked, then he gets rescued, then the villains get their ass kicked, then Superman rescues, then he gets his ass kicked, then he gets rescued. I mean, just on and on and on and on. You are begging for this thing to end by about the second ending. But the ultimate solution to the problem was Superman just lifting this big rock out of the sea and throwing it into space, which is why I don't understand why he even bothered to land on it in the first place. I mean, what was he planning to do? Just lift the damn thing out of the damn ocean already. I also completely refuse to accept that he could have lifted that thing in the first place. I mean, in the first Superman, you hang a small piece of kryptonite around his neck and he can't do shit. But in this Superman, you expose him to a continent made of kryptonite and stab him with kryptonite, and he'll still lift it up out of the ground like it's nothing. Give me a fucking break. Of course, Superman isn't going to die. He's fine after a stay in the hospital, and he gives his son a few words and flies off for the last time in the franchise. It should have been the last time decades ago. This movie, more than any other movie, demonstrates how invaluable Batman Begins was to the superhero genre. You don't go back and try to do a sequel after a dead franchise, you start again. And thanks to Batman Begins, we will hopefully never have another incident like Superman Returns. We have the Man of Steel coming next year, and I look forward to it. It'll be nice to see a Superman film that tries to move forward rather than just sucking off the style and plot of the previous films. But as for Superman Returns, I don't hate it. I don't. It honestly didn't even make me care enough to hate it. The plot was bad, the characters were mostly bad, but more than anything, this film made me live up to my name. I am truly confused. I don't even know what terms they wanted me to accept this movie on. Sequel, remake, or reboot. Pick one. Otherwise, you are stuck with this. Superman Returns. A bland, lifeless sequel with no idea what it wants to be or where it wants to go.